Welcome back to Learning Unity with 3D Game Kit. So far, we've set up our project, explored the Unity user interface, and learned the basics of game objects. Now let's start building. In this video, we're going to create a sandbox environment where we can experiment with GameKit features. We'll use a template scene, add geometry, and organize our assets properly. By the end of this, you'll have a workspace where you can test and build freely and have fun with the GameKit tool. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, let's talk about this term to begin with, sandbox. In game development, a sandbox is a test environment where you can freely experiment without affecting the main game. Think of it like a playground where you can try out mechanics, test assets, and build ideas without restrictions. We're going to set this up inside of Unity so we can have our own sandbox to play with the 3D Game Kit features. To get started, let's go ahead and create a sandbox scene. Now, we're going to do so by using the built-in template that comes with the 3D Game Kit. In the last video, we set up this little test area so I could show you guys kind of the basics of objects, prefabs, components, and we ran into some issues with Ellen not being controllable and kind of running off of a cliff. So how do we get around that? Well, we work with the tools that they have set up for us. So we're going to come down here to our assets folder, click into the 3D Game Kit, and inside of here there is a scenes folder, and more importantly there is this underscore template scene. So what we want to do is open this up. So let's go ahead and just double click, and this will load the scene. So this is just like opening a Maya file or a Blender file, just it's going to open right here inside of Unity. Now remember, one scene is one level, and there's quite a bit going on here. You'll see that we already have a lot going on in our hierarchy, and it's organized in a particular way. You'll notice these empty game objects here that say gameplay, game utilities, global shading. These ones in white, these are just for spacing. They don't actually do anything. They're to make it a little bit more user-friendly, so we know where to nest things and where things go. This is a really nice user interface. Not all games have this. None of the games I have worked on have had anything this beautiful. So it's really nice they set this up for us. Now, in the last video, we talked about these blue things here. These blue things here are prefabs, and the prefabs that are coming in this template scene are ones that are necessary for gameplay. They have the rules attached to them, and if you remember what I mentioned last video, rules come from things called scripts. Now, scripts interact with objects in different ways. If I go ahead and click on this depth volume here, you will see that we have some things we're familiar with, like transforms and colliders, but at the bottom here, we have this thing called the script. What the script is going to do is it's going to utilize these different colliders, and it's going to make it so the game can identify when something collides with it, it's going to make it die. So there's a lot of things like that. You can see the camera rig here. If we click onto this, the camera rig is going to be run by a camera rig script. So for our simple beginner brains, we don't need to worry about scripting. If you guys really like game development and you want to get into writing code, writing the rules, I highly encourage you guys to look into scripting. It's a different beast. Like I mentioned, this channel, we're focusing more on the art side of things. So as an artist, what do we do in Unity? We kind of build things. We place things, construct things, and we attach scripts sometimes. Sometimes that's actually done by the engineering team. So a lot of the times we don't have to get our hand dirty working in the industry. Now, let's go ahead and just hit play to begin with to see what happens in this particular scene. When you click play, it should automatically switch to the game view. It doesn't always do this, but it should this time. If not, we know how to get to it. And there we go. Now, this is a very different experience than last time when we hit play. This time we actually can come in here and we're running around with the WASD keys, spacebar to jump, and then of course we can recreate Ellen's fall by jumping off the edge. But you'll see instead of falling for all eternity, she actually dies and respawns, and that's all the game logic here that is working. Now, if you're stuck in this view, you can hit escape to bring your cursor back. You can quit, that works, or you could hit the little pause button up top. So now that we've taken a look at this, let's go ahead and save this out as our sandbox as a new scene. You do not want to accidentally save over this template because anytime you go to build a level, let's say you wanted to create a multi-level game, you're going to want to come back to this clean template to begin with. So saving out that scene, let's go to File, Save As, and you can either name this Level 1, you can name it Sandbox, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to put it in my scene folder where we put that test scene earlier, and we're just going to name this our sandbox scene. That way, if we like it, we could always change it to level 1, or we could refine our level 1 after we play in our sandbox and just keep this one for setting things up, experimenting, and understanding how they work. So let's click save, and we're good to go. Now, let's go ahead and start with one of the biggest issues, which is the claustrophobia. We weren't really able to run very far. If we go ahead and select the ground plane in here, the ground plane has actually been set up with a special material that will adjust as we scale it. So if I just hit R to scale here, and we grab this middle button here, you'll see this not only gets bigger, but we can see that that texture is also changing with it, which is a really neat feature. This is nice to have. A lot of the times when you scale something inside of Unity, you run into this issue where the textures just stretch, but this one has an intelligent shader attached to it, so it takes that into account. Now, the other thing you might notice is as I'm scaling this up, these things are kind of turning into mountains, and we don't really want that for our base mesh. So if you want to lower the volume of the ground here, you can actually scale down in Y, and that will flatten things out. So I want to keep this relatively flat, maybe some lifts and indentations, not a whole lot, just something to kind of begin with. Now, you can decide how big you want this to be. We could also enter the scale up here. So for example, I could make this 10 by 10 just to make a solid number. And for the height, I could maybe set that to 1 so we have the same elevation change that we had originally. Now, if we hit play, we should have a lot more room to run around in and to begin with. So now you can see we got a bit more space, and the world is feeling more full before we get to that ledge and runoff. Now, having a good idea of how big a world is, how long it takes to transverse, those are pretty important things. So just kind of be mindful of that during your level building. You don't want it to take a week to get across your level, so don't go too crazy with it, especially for this first experiment. Okay, so now we're ready to kind of build something in here, but before we do that, let's talk a bit about the hierarchy organization. I pointed it out that it is organized before in a way that makes it so we can adjust our levels. Now, the hierarchy is where all of the objects in our scene are listed. Unity uses a parent-child structure, which helps keep things organized, and we took a look at that in the previous section with the little light prefab we made. There are categories, though, we might want to put things in. So for example, characters is going to include characters. This is our playable characters, but also other interaction like enemies. We have lighting. Any lights we'll want to place under there. User interface, we're not going to worry about that, but you can see it's here. We have some tools which we might be able to access. Game utilities and gameplay, these are essential scripts to running the game. So in short, this top section here, this is going to be kind of a no-go zone. We don't really want to touch anything here. UI, we also don't really want to get into unless we're adjusting the user interface. That's what UI stands for. So this is going to be the bottom section where we mostly work inside of. And for this part, we're going to want to work within the level assets. We're going to want to add in any geometry to this section. So let's try and keep things neat and tidy by utilizing these groups that we have here and keeping our environment, our interactables, anything inside the level under the level assets, and things like characters, any enemies we create under the characters section. And this is good to practice because when you get into industry, you do have to keep this rigid structure. It's different for every project you work on. One of the last projects I worked on, I did something wrong and it broke the game for the entire team for like 3 days. It wasn't anything on my end. I duplicated a folder and it had the wrong name. I just didn't understand the system. So you need to make sure you play along with the system the best you can. This one's a little bit more robust, so it should be fine, but hey, you never know. So let's go ahead and bring in some objects to our sandbox and start building here. We can come down here into our assets folder to find where these are living. So it's going to be down here in the project window. We're going to want to navigate to our 3D game kit, and we're going to take a look in prefabs. Remember, prefabs are those prefabricated objects, which means they have all sorts of scripts and cool stuff attached to them that are going to allow us to just drag and drop things into the scene. And if we take a look inside of here, there's going to be a folder here called Environment. This is going to be the tools we need to build an environment, to build our scene. So if we go ahead and open this up, you'll see they have all sorts of different categories here. We have that dropship we looked at. We have rocks, stonework, structures, vegetation. We have some water. So we can start placing these and having some fun with the level creation. So we have our level assets folder. Let's go ahead and take a look inside of here. Let's start with creating some sort of a narrative for our scene. We have the dropship here. We could act like this is crashed maybe, but let's go ahead and get something for it to be crashed into. We could come down here and we could take a look at maybe some rocks, and we can take a look at what rocks we have inside of the level. You'll see we have all sorts of different rocks here. And to start with, we can just drag this in to our scene, and you'll see it will be all set up and ready to go. Now, you'll see that this put this under spawned prefabs, which is just what's on the bottom here, right? I hit Control Z to undo there. We'll eventually want to move this under something like level assets, but we can go ahead and place this into the scene here, and we can start by building out our scene. Now, this feels a little bit big for me, so I'm going to bring this down to 5 by 5, so I'm not building a massive scene. And I can just use these rocks to kind of create a natural barrier. You'll notice I scaled this up, so these are scalable, similar to the other aspects of the scene. And I'm just going to create a bit of a natural feeling barrier here, maybe just crashing some of these into each other to create something that feels restrictive, like the player can't escape and kind of just jump out of the level. Now, since we're just kind of building here, I'm not going to worry too much about how these look, but you can stretch these out a bit. You can see I can make that a bit taller, and it still reads good enough. They're nice and stylized. It's one of the advantages of stylized assets. You'll also see it's using a similar setup on the material here, where it is set up to scale. So you can see that as I scale this, the texture is scaling as well. So some really nice advanced shading techniques being used here to make this kit just more user-friendly and fun, which I am a huge fan of. That's one of the reasons I like playing with this kit when I'm doing kind of my initial refresher of Unity for the year. All right, so let's just kind of keep building here and take your time with it. I'm just going to go ahead and speed this up. One thing you can do too is you could kind of look at existing game level, maybe something that inspired you to get into games, and create something similar. This is a platformer style game, so not all games are going to fall under that category, but you can have some fun with it and figure things out. All right, so I'm just going to speed through and have some fun creating some geometry here and a level. You'll notice some of these don't have backsides, so kind of be aware of that. Game objects are set up to be as optimized as possible for rendering, so they don't have a backside to save on the render there, right? If you don't need to see it, you don't need to have it. And it actually saves a ton of data just in terms of polygons and in some cases texturing, depending on how the scene is set up. All right, so I kind of have this basic layout here with these rocks. Let's look for something a little bit more exciting inside of the environment. If you come in here to stonework, you can also find some statues, stairs, some relic type stuff here. I could go ahead and maybe build a mysterious wall or something here, or doorway that doesn't necessarily open. Maybe I could use something like this huge gate here to kind of imply there's more to this world. Unfortunately, this gate doesn't seem to have a door attached to it. I might have to look at that and see if there is one. It does not, so I might have to set that up to have a door inside of it. So they have it set up to kind of be an archway. If I wanted to make this have a door, I could set this to 0, 0, 0, which is usually the easiest way. And if we take a look, we have this door huge. I could add this in here and set this to 0, 0, 0, which will put these together. And then we could do one of the things we did in the previous section, which is create an empty and nest it underneath it. So I could game object, create empty. We could make this gate with door. And we could take the gate huge and the door huge and nest them under that gate with door. And if we do that, let me hit cancel here. I think I was going to break the prefab on accident. There we go. Let's do them one at a time so they don't nest under each other and break. If I do that, I can now move this empty game object, and we can just place this over here. All right. So we can use that to kind of create a natural barrier. And we could take a look at some of these other objects down here for fun. You know, if we wanted to create kind of an implied staircase or something. Maybe these are like ruins. Maybe there was a building once. We could create sort of a narrative there. You know, maybe it was destroyed by a landslide here, so maybe we have a staircase kind of poking out of this area, kind of just crashed into there. Maybe we even create more of a narrative of this being, you know, part of a civilization, and we take some of these pillars. Let's look for whole pillars. These ones are kind of broken corner pillars, but, you know, we could sink these into the ground and maybe have some fun with it. Kind of implying these are ancient ruins or, you know, something long forgotten and broken. So have some fun, you know, create some sort of a narrative with it. These could also be used for like objective navigation if we actually had a level plan in mind. I'm having a hard time with the position here. This is also a good opportunity to kind of talk about the gizmo and where it rotates from. You can see here it's set to local. You can also set this to global, and that will switch between world and object mode on the pivot. So you'll see with move right now it's in object mode. It moves along the object space of this. But if I switch this to global, it will now move along world space. So I'm going to keep that on local space for now and rotate this to where the side with a hole in it isn't visible and kind of collapse this into the ground. And I actually might ixnay this one for now. But take some time with it, have some fun building things out here. I might add this, you know, runic circle here. That looks kind of neat. Maybe just place that in the middle. And then, like I mentioned, let's come in and maybe crash that airplane. So if I come under environment, dropship, create a narrative here that maybe we're stuck. We could come in here and maybe have this crashed off in a corner here, or even into the ground here. I'm not going to do anything too exciting with it, but we could place that here to kind of imply, hey, we're stuck. Things could be better, and we might be able to add some more features to this later to make it more interesting visually, but for now, let's just do that with the basic geometry, so that way we can see how that's looking and have a little bit of a level to begin with. All right, so let's go ahead and hit play, and we can now run around our world, and you can see we now have plenty of things to interact with. We have these interesting ruins. We have this big gate that we can't get out of, but we might be able to hack our way through. You got to look for that. That's why you have playtesters to make sure that none of these things are navigatable. You can see that's a bit of an issue. This doesn't actually have a box collider, so we're going to have to take a look at that and figure out what's going on there. And same with some of these other areas. Our ship looks fine. Kind of cool that it's crashed in there. You can go to the cockpit. But yeah, we'll want to check up on any of these things. So let's see what's going on with this chunk here, why I seem to not be interacting with it. And sometimes you have to troubleshoot these things. So if we take a look at this, the first thoughts are, does it have a collider? And it does not. You'll notice it actually does not have a collider. So what do these other things seem to have? Let me click on one of these objects. It has a mesh renderer, probes. So it looks like it's attached here to the top one. So it looks like it does have a mesh collider and it's flagged as an environment. If we take a look at this one, you'll see that the mesh collider is there, but it actually got moved to the wrong position. So this is an interesting issue when you move things. When I moved this, I actually grabbed not the top of the hierarchy. I grabbed one of the children here. So there's not really a good way to fix this. I could find the one that I like here and move it into approximately the same location. So you can see here it's -16 on Z, And I can do that with each of these. These are the LODs, the level of detail. So these need to all align to be in the right spot. And in the cliff here, I could do the same thing. I'm not sure how I would do that, though, because it became misaligned to its collider here, right? So you can see this is actually the master positioning. So I'm actually going to delete that one and just get rid of that because it seems to be having problems. And I might grab something new and drag it in, but I think I'll leave it there for now. Give us a little bit more room for mechanics and gameplay features. Yeah, there you go. Now, let's organize this a little bit more before we move on to the next task. You can see I have all of these groups here, and this does start to take up a lot of space. So I'm going to create another game object here. We're just going to go to create empty. I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this game geo, or I could switch it to level geo to be more specific. And I can nest each of these underneath here, so that way they're nested under a single group. And that allows me to collapse this, but more importantly, it allows me to easily move this here under the level assets. That way it stays nice and organized. And if I want to add anything to that, I can. So now that we have this set up, let's go ahead and save. That way our progress is saved, and we could continue building this out, continue playing with it and adding elements, or we can move on to look at more features. All right. So now that we have an idea of placing these things, let's go ahead and see if we can give ourselves a challenge with building a level by trying some guidelines. So try making at least one rock wall that the player can't pass, like a barrier like I created here. Let's try adding a place we can jump to. That's something I haven't experimented with here, but if we come down here into the environment props, you can see we have rocks. We could use these. We have a lot of structures that we could play around with. We have things like stonework, so we could play around with all of those to create sort of a jumping puzzle. Make something that a player can jump over. Add two versions of something where one is scaled larger and the other is scaled small, and try out some decoration, some rocks, some floating islands. See what kind of things you can make in the level here. So let me go ahead and give that a try myself. I'll just come in here and take a look at some of the things we have and just kind of build some basic obstacles that our player can navigate and run around. And I'll keep that idea of kind of a ancient ruin in mind while I'm doing this to kind of keep a similar theme going. But, you know, have some fun with it and see what you can create. All right, so coming back to this, I've gone through, I've placed some elements here, had some fun with the rock. I didn't quite fix my issue here, so I might come in here and maybe smash a rock or two into here just to make this area work. So no reason why the player needs to see behind here, so I could just patch up that hole there. And I didn't quite get in any of these rocks here, but if we wanted to kind of manually place some boulders or something to add to the rubble, I could, and just kind of come in here and, you know, scale these. Now, I added some basic stuff to try out. I don't know if it's going to work, but we have sort of the structure here, a little area we can jump up to and try and get onto there. So let's give it a shot. Go ahead and hit play. And you might have to fine-tune and tweak things. We don't really know the jump distances, any of that type of stuff in here. So you don't know till you try. But, you know, play around with the level, interact with it, see what it's like. So that rock obviously wasn't designed to be scaled up. Might need to change that. Check out some of our jumping elements here. She can jump pretty high, so it looks like I'm going to be able to goat simulator right out of here. Let's not do that, though. So, you know, I'll have to patch that hole. But let's check out the jumping puzzle I made here, see if it is doable. So that's an interesting issue. We'll have to figure out what's going on there. Looks like I accidentally moved things again. You can see how it's changing. That's an LOD issue. Unfortunately, the LODs are very easy to grab on these guys. They could have nested those better. But outside of that, it looks like I can't quite get up here and definitely can't get up there. So I'll want to make some adjustments on this, but just keep fine tuning your level. Try and make sure it makes sense. If you run into any issues like I'm running into with this guy, like I mentioned, this is probably an LOD issue. You can see these things are getting offset, so I might try something different here. But I also know some of the areas that are problematic. For example, this needs to be a bit bigger, and then maybe just to keep things simple, I just Control-D to duplicate this, and then scale this down and do a series of these kind of off of here to allow the player to jump up there, kind of build an artificial staircase. And, I could come in here and I could patch up this hole. I'll just do it the same way I did with this, or even better, to save geometry, I'll just stretch this one out and just smush it back here, so that way there's no way they can get through this door, and everything's sealed up. But let's not do it so much that we make the door look like it's made out of stone. There we go. Natural barrier, create some little caves, kind of neat. Okay, so go ahead and have some fun with it. Build out your level. When you're all done, click that save button, and then we'll start adding some more mechanics to this as we go. Now we have a sandbox scene ready to go. We've set up our space, added assets, and organized our scene properly. In the next video, we'll start bringing our game to life by adding interactivity and gameplay elements. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe, and drop any questions down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.